Hello, and welcome to the Security Journal UK Leaders in Security podcast. I'm your host, Becci Knowles, and I'm the editor of Security Journal UK. This podcast will explore the life cycle cost of a security system. That's why my guest today is Kieran Byrne. Kieran is the Architect and Engineering Manager for Axis Communications, and he's here to talk about the company's total cost of ownership approach. Kieran, welcome.
Hi, Becci. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast today. Looking forward to having this discussion together.
Kieran, demand for video surveillance is on the rise. So, what are the most common mistakes organisations make when purchasing a new system?
So if we look at the way that most large commercial security systems are being procured, more often than not, it's part of a larger scheme of works within a construction program, say a building refurbishment. And a lot of the time, there'll be several bidders within that contractual chain that are trying to sell that same security system. And to make it as easy as possible for procurement, most of the time you'll see what we call a price breakdown sheet being issued, which is essentially an Excel sheet which lists your line item costs of equipment. So whether that be camera prices, accessories or labour rates. And whilst I appreciate that does give a very easy to compare decision on day one, it doesn't really factor in the life cycle costs of a security system. And it doesn't explain how each individual component within that system actually affects the other parts of the overall security system. So the challenge that I often see is that the bidder that's proposing the most cost-effective solution on day one is often the one that secures the project. However, when we look at a comparison, let's say there was another bidder within that tender process that had a more expensive day one cost, but they may have factored in the total cost of ownership of a security system. So in the long run, they could have actually come out cheaper if the customer had looked at the life cycle costs, say over a 7 to 10 year period. I think much of the mistakes are based around short-term thinking for quick procurement wins on cost savings, rather than considering actually how long that security system is going to be with the client.
Okay. So, what does a security system really cost?
So, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, a security system can be complex, made up of several different components, which each require installing, commissioning, and then the maintenance thereafter. And when we look at it within a TCO model, the most common costs which are being considered are what we call direct costs. So that direct cost will be what we're seeing in them price breakdown sheets. So the cost of a camera on day one. But then when we open our eyes to the bigger picture, we can also see that we've got intangible costs and indirect costs as well to consider. So to look at some examples of, say, an indirect cost, so that could be the power associated with components within that system. And a personal example, which I looked at, so it was a project that I worked on, and an Axis P47 series camera was specified. An alternative was presented from another brand, which on paper they looked very similar. But then when we looked into the detail of them two different camera devices, the Axis camera had an average power consumption of 5 watts. But when we looked at the alternative manufacturer, it was 10 watts, which it might not seem a lot just on one camera on the initial procurement cost, but if we look at that, say, over 1,000 cameras over 5 years, that can be a massive cost difference when we look at actually running the system. And of course, you've got the infrastructure that's associated with that as well. And then if we look at an intangible cost, that could be cyber security. So yeah, we've all got responsibility within the supply chain to ensure that we're recommending and installing products which have cyber secure features. And it's probably something which might be considered as expensive, or at least that's what people have told me in the past, is those with better cybersecurity protection are generally the more expensive models based on the features inside them. The question that I like to ask is, well, what's the cost if it all goes wrong?
Yes, absolutely. What is the cost if it all goes wrong? I guess you can't really put a figure on that, can you?
No, so I mean, there's a lot of if we're talking around cybersecurity, there is costs associated to, say, fines if it's, say, a breach of GDPR or the NIS directive, but then you've also got all of the other reputational damages associated with that. So yeah, definitely something which is crucial to consider.
Kieran, tell me, how can systems integrators be more competitive using the total cost of ownership approach?
So, of course, all integrators want to be more competitive because ultimately we need to make a profit margin, and the businesses we work for need to make money. But we need to make sure that we're striking a balance between being competitive whilst also forming a trusted long-term partnership with the suppliers and customers we're working with. So if we look at how installers can be more competitive using the TCO process, we need to consider what we've mentioned is that the indirect and intangible costs involved during that sale of the system. So when an installer is, say, pricing a system as well as selling that equipment, they will also be estimating the labour hours and the project management that needs to be sold to ultimately get that system up and running for the end user. And during that estimation, it's so important that they get it right, because any deviation from that initial labour estimation that ultimately eats into the profit margin. So if we look at some of the resources that we talk about within our TCO method, so we've got so many tools available. So if we look at designing the system from the start, we've got Axis Site Designer. So before we actually go to site, we know that the products that we've chosen are suitable for the purpose and the environment that they're being installed to. And then when we look at the labour estimations, we've also got device management tools, Axis Device Manager, that can really speed up that commissioning process and actually maybe allow you to install it quicker than what you estimated, and in which case your profit margin will increase. So yeah, they're all things that should be considered. And whilst the total cost of ownership method gives a better cost for the end user over the long run, it can also, that way of thinking, allow you to be more profitable as a systems integrator.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say, Kieran, are the what's the saving overall versus other approaches?
I mean, the saving can be, it can be into the thousands, depending on the amount of devices within that system. But yeah, it's particularly prominent when we look at them larger systems, especially when we're factoring in storage costs for the servers, and the infrastructure associated with powering the devices within that system.
And what about companies that want to upgrade their surveillance systems? Can the total cost of ownership model be applied there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's a worthwhile exercise for both end users that are looking to immediately upgrade their system, and also those that are planning into the future and say looking to upgrade in a 3 year timeline, because ultimately you can really plan ahead and provide that information to procurement stakeholders. With everything you need, so it's not a surprise when it does come to that initial purchase, and you're being battled for, say, going with the cheapest cost on day one, when the knowledge you've gained from, say, the total cost of ownership model shows that the value and the savings that can be considered throughout the entire lifespan of the system.
Okay, that makes sense. It seems that your Access Communications is doing a lot at the moment to raise awareness about total cost of ownership. Can I ask you why now? And is it working?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that customers are making the right decisions based on facts and education, because there's such competition within the market, and those that are buying security system are seeing so many different messages from different manufacturers, different sales and marketing messages, and it can be a bit of a minefield sometimes to really know what system is the best, what's giving you the most value for your money. And as we've spoken about, that a security system is a long-term investment. It's fundamental to protecting the people, building the assets within that building, and also providing value to other use cases beyond security. We think it's really important from an Axis perspective, that we're looking at them costs over the entire lifespan, because we want our customers to feel like they're in a trusted long-term partnership with us, not just simply buying a product and the sale is done and walking away. We want to continue that support, work with our customers and guide them and learn from each other, essentially.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kieran, for speaking with me today. It's been really interesting, and I think there's been some real good practical advice and insights there for our listeners. Thank you.
No problem at all. And thank you very much for having me on the podcast. It's a topic I enjoy talking about, and I think it's something that we should all
Yes, I could
um,
tell. Yeah.
take a bit more interest within. We've got plenty of resources should anybody want to reach out for further information. We can sit with customers and walk them through the process, whether that be an end customer or even a systems integrator that, like you've said, is looking for ways to make themselves more competitive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thanks again. Thanks again, Kieran. Great talking to you. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. As I say, I imagine you found this interesting and helpful. And as Kieran said, do reach out if you have any questions, and he will be more than happy to help. So that's it. Thank you. I've been your host, Becky Knowles. This has been the Security Journal UK Leaders in Security podcast. Keep an eye out for our next episode coming soon.